Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to the AGS, the Airline Ground Services Digital Summit. And we've got two great guests here today. We've got Nikki Ozols, who's the Head of Safety and Compliance with Volare Aviation. And we've also got Thomas Konietzko, who's the EVP Sales and Marketing with Celebi Aviation. So welcome, Nikki. Welcome, Thomas. Love to have you on.
Hi, both. Chris, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Chris. Nice to be here.
Great. Now, guys, what we normally do is we start with just a very brief of what your current position is and what your accountabilities are, okay? And then we'll talk a little bit about this damn crisis that's affecting our aviation industry and everybody else's industry as well. So, Nikki, if we start with yourself, so just very briefly.
Thanks, Chris. So hi, everyone. I'm Nikki. I have very recently, in the past 2 weeks, walked into a new role in the private aviation sector. I do exactly what it says on the tin. I am head of safety and compliance for a private jet fixed wing and helicopter operator. So I am responsible for making sure that this organisation is safe and compliant, and that we continue to be so.
Very good, very good. And it's a broad and very, very responsible position there, Nikki. So we'll get into that shortly.
You know what they say, Chris, just give the job to a woman and she'll make sure it's done properly.
And that's not the first time I've heard that either. All right, great. And Thomas?
Yes, I've been in the industry about just about 7 years now, and I have been starting out at Swissport, and 2.5 years ago have taken the opportunity here at Celebi Aviation Holding. The difference, obviously, in size of the two, in magnitude, with above 300 airports and 40 airports, but it has been my responsibility in sales and marketing to ensure that we have that we follow the IATA guidelines on the contractual status and on what we are doing at the same time, making the growth happen that our shareholders have planned for us. So yeah, it's been a good journey ever since I moved to Istanbul, being here at Celebi.
I remember the 2.5 years has gone very quickly, Thomas.
Very quickly, very quickly.
I remember meeting you at a conference. But anyhow, good luck with that. That's brilliant.
Thank you.
Now, this damn crisis, I said we'd come back to it. So, Nikki, can you just give us a little bit of an insight how the last 4 or 5 months has affected your business? And obviously, we've got another probably 5 or 6 or maybe 7 months of it to come with this second global wave. So, can you just touch on some of the key areas that you've experienced?
Yeah, sure, absolutely, Chris. So, as I said, I've only recently joined private aviation. So the comparison between private and commercial is actually quite different. So for the private sector, we've obviously had to make sure that we comply with new safety measures and safety clean measures. Private aviation is not exempt from ensuring that customers that we transport are still looked after, and we ensure that the environment that they travel in and the crew that operate those sectors and the teams and the staff who are working on those aircraft are all kept safe. That is one very clear principle that transcends both areas of the industry. But in my previous role in commercial aviation, I mean, what a year it has been. It has absolutely turned on its head. We have had change management, we've had risk assessments, we've had to adapt to a completely new and extremely agile way of dealing with the changing situation. And speak on behalf of probably everyone in the industry, actually, when I say I'm absolutely exhausted, and I'm sure you will feel the same.
I know, exactly. And Thomas, how has it affected your side of the business?
Well, I mean, of course, it has affected the company a lot in terms of forecasting a best or worst case scenario. We were able to react to the situation and have implemented some not only the precautions to passengers, but to our employees as well, and then the operations. I would have to say that it's the difficult thing is, of course, for us to predict of what's coming. We have the restrictions on international flights by national governments, as we have just recently seen in Hungary, and also that we are at 15% of the international flight traffic in India, and only 35% of the flight traffic domestically in India. So that's actually giving us a worst case scenario. So it's that uncertainty in planning, and also when you are trying to speak to the different airlines, that the planning departments of the airlines are not really giving you an outlook for 2021 and beyond that, various speculations. It's the planning part. It's the planning part. It's the drop in flight volume. It's the fact that we as ground handlers can show up with half a tractor. I mean, we have about 85% of the costs if we do have an airport up and running. And that's the difficult part. Drop in revenues, nearly the same costs wherever the airport operations are running, and losing. So we basically have to think of cost measures, and what that would have to do with retrenchment and short labor work and these kind of things. Yeah,
no, it's been absolutely terrible. Now, even though you're both obviously both in the same industry, we all talk the same language, but there's a difference now with actually how each is positioned. So, Nikki, with regards to hygiene and consumer confidence, the private aviation side has had a real boost because of people's concerns. And I'm not sure, but I think it's roughly correct that, on a legacy carrier and a normal flight, you're looking at anything from 500 to 700 touch points. And you're looking at between 50 and 70 on a private aviation aircraft. So a little bit like the Challenger behind you. So with that in mind, what are you actually doing to communicate and let people be more aware of the hygiene perspective that's taken with regards to private aviation?
Yes, absolutely, Chris. It's a really good question. Even though we are carrying people, as you said, and they already assume that it is a safer environment, we still need to make sure that we follow processes like ensuring the previous travel footpaths of customers before we take them to countries that have restrictions in place. We still need to make sure we bring customers back to the UK, that they are aware of the restrictions that are in place when they return back to the UK. And in terms of keeping the aircraft clean and hygienic, we're following exactly the same principles that commercial aviation are following. We have some excellent partnerships in place. They are sanitizing the aircraft. They are using viricide products exactly as commercial carriers are using. We're still having to go through all the same airworthiness checks and ensuring that those products don't conflict with the airworthiness of the cabin interior and the flight deck, and ensuring that we are supporting customers who are still traveling at an uncertain time, be it in a slightly different way to passengers traveling on a commercial aircraft. We still need to assure them and their families and their loved ones that are generally traveling with families and friends at the moment, and staying together in their bubbles, that they are kept safe. And just because they are traveling privately, it doesn't mean that they're exempt from any of the safety measures that the industry are employing at the moment.
Okay, yeah, good. And Thomas, from your side, obviously, and the ground handling perspective, I've actually travelled during the crisis, and the countries that I've travelled between, some, I've got to say, are absolutely fantastic. When you land, you think, my goodness me, why is this not happening from where I took off? And what I don't understand is why that level of consistency can't be in place. So from a ground handler's perspective, everything that you're doing, are you seeing that it's being communicated effectively enough from the airports?
It's true that the airports are doing very different things. In general, we can say that the precautions are well in place. Sometimes they're better seen and better performed, depending on which airports you're going there. But let me just say that we take in the direct precautions for the 3 segments. Once for the passengers, then for the employees, and then for the operations itself. So I can only say that we have the hygiene disinfection processes that, you know, in lounge and waiting areas where we are asked by the airport that they need to be constantly disinfected. And then basically we say that the community health is at the forefront. So we are not being asked that we interfere, for example, in the boarding process, but obviously in the announcements, whether it is, you know, at the check-in process, whether it's at the boarding gates, we are set to remind our, you know, the passengers to keep the mask on and to keep the social distance, and just like you're doing it when you exit an aircraft. Where you basically have an orderly process of leaving the aircraft. We're trying to do the same during the check-in process and the other process. For our employees, it's kind of the same thing. Everybody who's working at the airport, an administrative leave is provided to the employees that are in risk groups, so we allow them to work from home. And then overall, we stopped all of our meetings and event attendances. So this is being done in order to avoid also the people who are coming in contact with passengers at the same time. And the direct precautions at the airport, as we were told by the airports, is employees' fever is being checked at every shift beginning, for example. Hand sanitizers, we are supposed to put it around, and you see it everywhere in the airport. Some of it is being put up by the airport, some of it we put it up ourselves on the check-in counters, but then also on the cargo side in the warehouse buildings, it's also what are the preventions that are given from the airport. So I could go on with a lot of that, but it's basically a mix on how much are you able to follow the request by the airport to put all the necessary precautions in place. And like I said, some airports are stricter than others to enforce it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Thomas, just on another subject matter there now, obviously the amount of ground equipment, whether it's GSE or NME, is substantial at any airport when you come in and out anyhow. Now, even more so because of the downsizing or the practical sizing of the carriers. How are you managing that? Is there a collaboration within the airport for equipment, or are you mothballing? What are you doing with all of your equipment?
Well, obviously the idea is, and I mentioned it earlier, to find ways of cost savings. And if you utilize a lot of your equipment, there's also the maintenance cost that you're having. So pooling equipment and trying to find collaborative ways with other handlers on some of the equipment utilization, be it high loaders, be it pushbacks, and so on and so forth. Yeah. That's of course something that can work very well in some places better than others. But it is a huge cost, just like I would imagine with the aircrafts. If you utilize it, you need to put it through your maintenance shops, and the less equipment in use, the less. So where pooling is necessary, where pooling is possible, and different handlers working together, that's probably the way to go right now to save as much on the maintenance cost as possible.
Yeah. No, I agree. And Nikki, from your perspective, and Thomas mentioned about lots of people working from home and everybody's getting used to it now. I keep saying the first time I heard Zoom, I thought it was from Fat Larry's band back in 1983. I didn't have a clue what Zoom was now. I wish I'd have bought some shares in the damn thing. But as far as communication and information, everything, are you seeing a different type of like leadership requirement, for people to understand how to deal with people who've, got anxieties, and SMS and human factors is a big issue that comes into play? Is there consideration now for, how to coach and teach people why it's important to lead in a different way, and to teach people how to be led in a different way?
Absolutely, and mental health is a really good point, and let's talk more about that. But to answer your question, we are absolutely having to lead and manage in a different way. And I think for the first time, we've really been forced to stop and actually listen before we do anything else. We're a very reactive industry, especially operators and operational departments. We can be very reactive. Leaders put demands out. We want actions. We've got targets. We know what needs to be done. We have to, and we have had to, take a little bit of a step back. We're having to be more understanding. We're having to be more compassionate people in general. And we're having to actually take that time to listen to people. Some people are adapting really well to working from home. You know, if you're someone who has a naturally introverted energy, actually perhaps working from home kind of suits you in some ways, and actually some people prefer it. You know, we can't just assume everyone's working from home and actually it's no good for everyone, because that's not the case. But then there will be people who are used to the hustle and bustle, particularly of the airport environment, and coming into an ops center and coming into a busy office, who actually do just need to talk and be heard and be listened to. And I think in terms of leadership style, I can certainly be very guilty of being very 0 to 60 and very red. Red is one of my previous nicknames from a previous company. And I've really had to teach myself just to stop and wait until someone has finished speaking before you give advice or you give guidance or you react, because it's difficult to really know how anyone will deal in this situation. Even ourselves, we think we know ourselves better than anyone else, but we're all learning a new way of living and a new way of working now. Yeah,
no, 100%, Nikki. I know what you mean about red, though, not yourself. I've got to say, not much green and blue.
Yeah, you understand.
Yeah. Thomas, on your side now, and with the fact that, you know, carriers, as soon as there was a little glimmer of hope, everybody was thinking about reboot and re-energize, and all of a sudden people were going from very, very low levels to a big increase, albeit it wasn't the same levels as last year. Now, for yourselves to actually adapt to that must be a very, very difficult situation. And the carriers are demanding, maybe, you know, aircraft are coming in roughly at the same time. You've got such pressures. How have you managed that as well, with the leadership and the briefings and just accommodating all of those pressures?
Well, I mean, on one side, you're basically referring to the flight reduction and schedule changes, right?
Yeah.
So here, of course, it is something where we have to make the airlines understand that we have to ensure full readiness for the flights. We can't, when the flights are coming in, the crews have to be there. And it basically leads to an ad hoc flight operation, basically, in many cases. Our teams are expected to serve on time with the full effectiveness. First of all, we have said, let's take out the SLA penalties, for example. So the SLA penalties that usually apply if there is a flight delayed or or other things that can happen on the ramp or in the terminal building, that shouldn't really apply at this time. We simply have to say we can't show up with half the stuff, half the equipment. So we are, as I already mentioned, losing a lot of revenue due to these increased cost per flight. And that's not only for this ad hoc schedule and for the huge reduction in flight volume, but that's, of course, because we have a lot of other precautions to do. I mean, there's a lot of things that just for the crew to be ready, wearing masks, wearing gloves, wearing protective suits when they're disinfecting. So obviously, we are trying to deal with the airlines, and some are quite cooperative compared to others when it comes to a COVID surcharge. I know from a previous company like Swissport, there is a lot of discussion where we say COVID surcharges is something for basically material cost for added cleaning and protective wear. On the other hand, we have, and as you may know, in the main agreement, usually referring to 11.11.11.12. What happens when there are schedule changes and change of aircraft? We usually talk about those rates. So it's very difficult to negotiate with the airlines volume-based rate increases at this time. But it is, as I said, with some airlines easier than with others. But as I said, nobody should be selfish at this time. We should come around the table. We should basically, or in Zoom meetings or Teams meetings, and we should address the issues and make sure that the supplier, customer-supplier relationship really works well at this time of the crisis.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And the fact that you said some carriers are more supportive and understanding than others equally suggests that some still haven't come around to it yet. But some of the strict SLAs, they need to be realistically now put in place and not followed so rigidly. And also, I think everybody's aware that there are additional costs for everybody. And where possible, those costs shouldn't just be automatically passed on, but there should be a consideration for a proportion of it to make sure that everybody is working in the right direction. Now, the title is Collaboration and Sustainability. So coming back to the fact that this next 6 to 7 months is going to be critical for the industry. Some governments have been more supportive than others, some not. Some are very naive. Some have given rhetoric a little bit of air in, but they've not been thinking about the longer term impacts. Now, just from your own personal opinion and with your own personal experiences, how are you seeing the levels of collaboration in your own sectors, and what challenges do you see for sustainability in the future? So, Nikki, are you okay with that one?
Yes, Chris, I'll answer this from a commercial aviation perspective. I was a bit more involved in industry collaboration in that role. And I know this might be a controversial opinion, but I don't think we got off to a very good start in the beginning. We had different regulators across, governmental departments and aviation regulators with slightly different guidance. And that word is really important. For a long time, perhaps actually almost a month when this pandemic first broke, we were talking about complying with guidance material only. And then the next step was for carriers and ground handling partners to go away and do a risk-based approach. And while I understand that approach from the regulator, that only causes more inconsistency. If every organisation goes away and assesses their own risk on a different risk basis, it's just going to cause more problems for our ground handling partners and our aerodromes. And in the UK, on top of that, we do have the additional challenge of the difference in approach from our devolved nations. So, at one time we had a different GAD arrival procedure, depending on whether or not you were landing in Wales or Scotland or England. And we have to accept that an industry that was already under a huge amount of strain and pressure for survival and sustainability cannot sustain operating in this inconsistent manner. It is not efficient. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of resource. It takes an awful lot of management. And if we're going to be sustainable going forwards, we need to really go back to lessons learned. What did we learn when this first broke? We did kind of mobilise within the UK our industry resilience group, which was attended by the DFT and the CAA and key airports and operational partnerships from around the country. And that was fantastic. We probably could have done with it a couple of weeks earlier than it did actually start. When we got the ball rolling, it was really interesting to see how many questions and how much uncertainty still stood. There were a lot of questions about the Public Health England guidance. There were still no rules, there was still no policies, there was still guidance. So for us to be sustainable and to weather out the next 6, 8, 12 months and potentially a second serious outbreak, we really need to go back to the soft start that we had to this the first time round. And someone, whether it's the CAA, whether it's ICAO, whether it's EASA, a regulator, a governing body, needs to get their arms around this and make some mandates. And I know that might not necessarily be a popular opinion, but that is what we need so that we all work consistently and therefore sustainably together going forwards.
100%, 100% agree. And I think the fact that in many areas where people are trying to please everybody but don't actually control anyone, it causes much more problems. It's absolutely unacceptable now that people can't get together. So 100% agree with you there. Now, Thomas, coming back to sustainability and looking at what's happening now over the next 5 to 6 months, and obviously with such a wonderful hub in Istanbul, I've been there many, many times. I mean, it must be almost tearful watching such a beautiful facility and the size of it not being utilised. How do you think the hub system will come back as opposed to point to point?
Well, I think that the important thing is right now that, I mean, obviously following the World Health Organization, Ministry of Health in each country market, also it's, you know, as well here in Istanbul, it's very important that the safety of the passengers that are going through and the comfort is ensured. So there's a lot of things that an airport itself can do. And I've seen, for example, that here in Istanbul, they have done quite a lot in terms of innovative solutions to have a safe travel experience. So there's the PCR quick tests. You can go out and you can basically say you come the day before and get your PCR test done, and then within 6 hours you actually get the email certified and stamped of your test results. There's also the way of you know, kiosks with available protective gear, disinfectants, and so on and so forth. Free you know, touch-free check-in, for example, temperature measurement at the time of check-in, airport communication in you know, even so they don't make any announcements at the Istanbul airport. There's a regular you know, announcements of how you keep social distance, how you keep wearing the masks. So I think it's all first and foremost that once you are coming through an airport, and let it be Istanbul airport, how is your travel experience arriving and departing at that airport? And then I think that people's confidence is going to come back, and it's going to be, you know, and then we can maybe talk about some sustainability and coming back to previous levels.
Yeah, no, exactly. Now, something that concerned me with like some experiences, and also with talking to various parties, was the fact that, and coming back to your point, Nikki, about the risk-based assessments, some handling agents, some carriers were actually insisting that all of their staff wore PPE all the time, and especially as a mitigating action if they were doing, you know, loading passenger aircraft as preighters. And then others were saying that it wasn't 100% necessary. Now, coming back to the WHO and lots of governments who at the beginning said, you know, to have something over your mouth wasn't a protection for yourself or for others and wasn't as effective. And then I've watched recently the WHO webinars, and they're actually talking with them on a panel, which makes absolutely no sense. That 360 turnaround, I just don't understand. Now, I'm assuming that from both of your perspectives, rightly or wrongly, you would just like to see a consistent directive that said, this is what must be done, this is what will happen if you don't do it, and this is why we're actually introducing it, so that it causes less conflict amongst personnel, the interaction between personnel and passengers, the interaction between stakeholders, etc. I'm assuming that given that opportunity, and if you were on some form of sustainability task force, that you would say, right, we need definitive decision making. Would that be correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And we all need to be doing the same thing. Different organizations, if you think about the aircraft footprint, you could have, you know, upwards 10, 12, 15 different suppliers working on an aircraft footprint. And when some of you are in masks, some of you are not, some of you are practicing social distancing, some of you are coming in two-man teams, some of you are coming in separate vehicles. We've really got the potential to actually be increasing our safety risk by not all working in the same way and singing from the same hymn sheet at the moment.
Yeah, totally. And Thomas?
Well, it's exactly the same. I mean, all our airline, our freight forwarder customers that are entering to the building without masks, that we simply don't accept it. That we strictly follow that social distancing rules during our operation. That we basically do that also in elevators, for example, there, you know, to enforce it. And sometimes there's some supervision to guarantee that it's also done. We also have a working schedule for medical personnel. So when people are not feeling well and so on, so just to give the people the comfort when they are at work, that they do have some, you know, some medical staff around that can look after them. We also have some transportation plans where we basically say whether people are being shuttled and coming with the buses or we don't put more than 50% capacity in each bus. Meal halls, that's another thing. Dining halls. Now it's a different idea that what you also see in the lounges, everything is pre-packed and is being served in lunch boxes. So Yeah, I would say that what we as Celebi are doing, if we see that with the other companies working around the airport, kind of following the same guidelines, it's basically the respect that we should have for one another and for each other's health.
Good, good. Thomas, you touched on something there, and this hygiene issue. So just taking from a cargo perspective, the thing that's frustrated me all the time that I've been in this industry, and unfortunately I'm an old man now, and I can still remember things that I thought would have been done a long time ago. And one of them is that, you know, documentation. There's still so much documentation being handballed between each other. And if ever there's an opportunity now for the catalyst of change to stop all this documentation, it would be the hygiene argument, you know, with regards to airway bills and all the different documents that have to be passed from one person to another, from a remote control post to the reception area, etc. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think that more digitalization would be absolutely the way to go, and obviously certain things are in place. I think that for right now, whether or not this is the time where there can be a focus on that, because that even so I've been speaking about the reduction in flight volume, that doesn't speak, isn't the same for the cargo. I mean, we see some kind of near budget level cargo volumes coming in and out, whether it's Frankfurt, whether it's Budapest, whether it's also Istanbul or Delhi cargo. So here we basically have to try to keep up with what's coming, and now also preparing ourselves for these special cargo pharma handling. So at the moment, rather than thinking how you can improve the processes of dealing with this paperwork, it's sanitizing the warehouse area constantly, and the offices, sanitizing incoming cargo, and let them stay actually for some time, and the delivery order and the storage, fee payment area. Also making sure that you don't serve more than a certain amount of people in the same area. So there are so many precautions, so many new things and rules that we put in place, that even so what you're saying is something that has been in the talks for long. For right now, we have to just try to keep up and make sure that we have the right precautions to manage what needs to be handled.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, Nikki, one of the things that Thomas just mentioned there was vaccines and pharma.
Yes.
Okay, now from a private aviation perspective, I know that there was a lot of PPE and a lot of support work, repatriation, and sick patients, etc. Now, with the vaccines that are due to come, so whether it's vaccines or combinations of therapeutics, there's going to be a huge demand. Now, again, like always, things haven't been prepared or haven't been considered as quickly as perhaps they should be. And then there's an assumption that everybody understands exactly what's involved. Now, Tiaka and Pharma.aero, they did a survey. I think it was Sunrise or Sunray survey, and they covered something like 181 organizations, from airports to airlines to ground handlers to operators, etc. And the general consensus was that, the industry as a whole is not as established and ready as it possibly should be for vaccines and the expected pressures that are going to come. Now, have you got any comment on that? Is there anything that you'd like to say about that, or what have your organisation or your previous experience been involved with in the preparation and collaboration between all organisations with regard to the transportation and distribution of vaccines?
It's not something I've been very involved in, to be honest, Chris. Regarding the transportation of vaccines, I think we've got huge capability. And when the pandemic first hit, you only had to look on LinkedIn to see the number of passenger carrying airlines that all of a sudden were carrying huge amounts of cargo on seats and in holds. So I think we've had actually a bit of dry run and preparation for transporting lots of things and lots of cargo and lots of medical supplies.
Okay,
probably
all right.
Something we are relatively prepared for now, actually.
Okay, good. And Thomas?
Yeah, I couldn't really say that we are preparing ourselves for it. I mean, as I mentioned before, it's a cold room storage. It's a special cargo handling area. So from whenever that would start and it would pick up to manage the special cargo. There is the preparation for it together with the airlines on which what needs to be in place, and also which type of volumes can be expected.
Okay, all right, appreciate that. Now, as far as moving forward in these challenging next, I think probably somewhere around 7 to 8 months, things are going to have to be done differently again, and there's going to be more practical sizing. If you only look at last week, you look at volumes in all the airports against last year's, they're so down. There's very, very seldom any good news that you can look at the moment. But at the end of the day, the industry has been very, very resilient. The agility has been exceptional. And even though the cooperation or collaboration hasn't been as effective as some would want now, it was very effective to start with. So now for these next, like I say, 5 to 7 months, what would you individually like to see from the representative bodies, the regulators together to make a difference that everybody will look back and say, do you know something? Even under such terrible, terrible times, very little else could have been done better. What would you think? What do you think is necessary now, Nikki?
I think there are a lot of things. There's a lot of answers to that question, Chris. We've already talked about industry collaboration, aligning, policy making, rule making, the difference between rules and guidance. But I think there are two other things that we can now do as an industry, and our regulator can absolutely support in. The first one is emergency planning and our emergency planning requirements. Now, I'm sure every operator is guilty of running pretty much exactly the same emergency response program every single year. There's a bird strike or there's a fire in engine on descent or ascent into an aerodrome which is prepared to deal with such an emergency. It would have been fictional, it would have been laughable 12 months ago to say, let's plan for a scenario where crew and customers of an entire aircraft mid-flight become sick. And I've heard a lot of feedback from various different regulators actually. You should consider in your next emergency response practice rehearsing a COVID-related scenario, and that's just opinion. That's just two people having a discussion. Do we actually need to go away as an industry and actually mandate being a strong word, but actually quite acceptable given the severity of the situation, that we actually do start practicing what we do in these scenarios where we have mass disruption and the cause is something that we cannot control. So I think our emergency planning is one. And another thing that I really think we need support with, and the regulator has opened the door in past years in regards to human factors and how we manage human factors and how we evaluate human factors and how we support different conditions as a result of human factors. But I don't think that's raw enough. I don't think that's getting to the root cause enough. We keep talking about human factors and stress fatigue and anxiety, and we are not doing enough as a regulated industry to tackle that. Now, we need to start a new approach, and I believe our regulators can support us with this, in how we manage and how we approach mental health. We've got two ends of the spectrum at the moment. We've got people who are still going to work, who are extremely stressed, who are under a lot of additional pressure, who are worried about the future. And equally, we've got people who aren't currently in the workplace, who are stressed and are full of anxiety and worried about the future. We have got some absolutely fantastic initiatives going on in the industry at the moment. We've obviously got Aviation Action that Chris Bard and Chris Meeking are heading up. But that is a charity, and that is off the back of a couple of people who decided or who took action as to the right thing to do. We need to take another step. We need to ensure now that in a safety critical industry, as the third most heavily regulated industry in the entire world, that our regulators start supporting the absolute necessity, that we are really open and we start changing our mental health culture. Corporate organisations are very good at providing options for medical care and medical cover.
Yeah.
That seldom covers mental health support, and how we are now going to move forwards with a more compassionate understanding that actually we should have started taking care of this issue a long time ago. But this pandemic has really brought that to the forefront.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the SMS program now, there needs to be almost like an extra module on enhanced human factor issues that cater for something as specific as this. So I totally agree with that. And Thomas, have you got an opinion on that? You know, with the human factor issues now and the way the landscape has changed so much?
I think Nikki has touched on good points there. I think that it's the respect for staying safe, for disinfected airplanes, for prepackaged food items, for crews with gloves, protective wear, with maybe making an effort to take a PCR test before 48 hours prior to departure to see that you basically enter into the airport without without being infected. I think across the whole value chain, we shall honor and act responsibly, cooperatively, be not to be selfish, to understand the position for one another, and that we basically say there's going to be a common future after this pandemic and continued relations. So what we are doing right now, also in our negotiations with the procurement teams, it's very important that we get it right, because we'll meet again, and we'll have that this friendly approach, hopefully, that we are taking right now in understanding one another. We'll also want to be able to continue that once we come out of this.
Yeah. And I think, please God, when things do improve, and obviously they will, like everything does, it's just the amount of time and the other little detours that happen on the way. But collaboration and sustainability are going to be so important, and the continuity and sustainability element of everybody's business. Some of the things, the legacy of waste and initiatives and blockers and politicking and all those things that, please God, people will learn from, and they'll go back to basics and do things in a simpler way and a more effective way by identifying what's critical, what's important, and what's just recommended. And we need to all be focusing now on the critical points. So we're nearly at the end, guys. So is there anything that you'd like to cover that hasn't been covered, or that you'd like to give an opinion on for the listeners? So, Nikki?
I mean, typical woman, I've got lots of things I've got an opinion on that I would chew your ear off given half the chance. Chris, there is something that I am really worried about, and it is sustainability in its literal sense of our environmental sustainability. We are using a lot of disposable things. We talked about technology earlier on instead of cargo documentation, and that's a brilliant example of other ways we can be less wasteful. But we are using a lot of disposable items at the moment. And look, there's no reason why a pre-packed tray of aircraft food can't be pre-packed in reinforced cardboard instead of reinforced plastic. And we're seeing a lot of things like hand gel sachets, and my God, those face masks, I see them on the street. I see them, people throwing them out in their rubbish. They're being scooped up from beaches, bottom of the Great Barrier Reef. While we do need to be sanitary and make sure that things are clean, using things that we will just continue to produce and throw away, it is not a sustainable answer. And look, I don't have the answer. We are a terrible industry. We are not kind to the environment as it is, and we have made some fantastic steps forward There have been some very notable examples. Qantas have done an absolutely fantastic job over the last few years at having entire waste-free flights, which is absolutely brilliant. And I think we're at a really critical point here where we could go backwards if we're not careful. And we see it already, you know, face masks as opposed to face coverings. You know, we're told you know, you go into shops, your face needs to be covered, but at some airports you need a disposable face mask. We are not doing enough, and I know we're already very stretched, and there's a lot going on, and people are really trying their best with what they've got. But we need to regain some focus on sustainability, because we're just going backwards and being more wasteful than we were before.
Yep, I think personally that people will start to think about the world we live in after this, you know, once there's a little bit of breathing space, and I'm optimistic that things will be better. I just finished a series of podcasts with 2 astronauts and some pilots who circumnavigated the world, going over both poles on the anniversary of Apollo 11. And in that documentary, which comes out, it's actually out now, it's called One More Orbit. It's fantastic, but they actually cover a section in there about carbon underground. So they're not just talking about carbon zero, carbon negative, carbon neutral. They're talking about an organization that explains in such wonderfully simple terms how you can put things back into the earth underground that pull carbon out from the atmosphere. It's incredible. So I genuinely think people will learn. This is one of nature's ways of realigning everything and everybody, you know, and please God, you know, people will realize that you have to lead out of a crisis by caring about each other, caring about others, caring about where we live, what we do. So please God, things will come across like that. So thank you for that, Nikki. And Thomas, any last message or any point or
a couple of points maybe, what lessons learned. Yep. And moving forward, digitalization and sustainability. I think we were in a pretty good place. As you may know, we have this IATA certified training academy. It's called the Celebi Aviation Academy e-school. It basically provided us an infrastructure. So in order to do training validation programs and so on, I think that there may be for other companies, you know, maybe a good thing for, you know, during this lockdown period, we realized that all of our staff was able to be trained and do this from home and do this from remote. So having a training validation program in place that basically allows you to provide education and training on the job training, I think that would be something to invest in. You did ask me also about the digitalization and reduction of paperwork. So yep. Actually came to mind now that we do have in Budapest with the cargo city a new digital cargo handling system. That is you know, for communication, that's between customs office, customers, and Celebi. And so here we are trying to develop that. We have a track and trace function. I mean, the system will have a track and trace function so that there's a possibility for the customer to digitally track exactly what they're doing with what's happening with their goods and so on. So that's, I think, the whole part about digitalization, online learning, and making online tools available whenever there's a situation again where we can't physically meet. I think that should be a focus. And then the other thing in terms of sustainability, I mean, pre-COVID, we had quite a big topic, and that was that was the investment in sustainability, where we basically said, how do we reduce the carbon emissions? And so we basically have looked at that with a product called TaxiBot. That's a pilot-controlled, semi-robotic taxi bot that basically allows the pilot to take control of the airplane. But that's one way. I think we shouldn't lose the focus on that, or also to invest more in electrical ground support equipment. As we right now have such a reduction in flight volume, maybe that's the time to basically see, when everything is going to ramp up again, what can we do to reduce the carbon footprint, and make sure we look after the environment. So
100%.
I have points to make.
100%. Thank you for that, Thomas. In fact, I wish I'd have asked now about the capability of electric outlets at the airports, because in some cases everybody's willing to, you know, to move across, albeit the cost, but they don't have the supply capability at airports. So, you know, that's something that the whole industry needs to look at. So maybe we need a global shared whiteboard with best practices so everybody can start, you know, committing to certain things that make sense. But guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Lovely to see you. It's been a while. Nikki, lovely to see you. I'm glad the window cleaner didn't come back as often as he did when we were getting ourselves ready.
Thank you very much, Chris and Thomas. It was really nice to see you.
Yes. Thank you for giving us the opportunity. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Take care and good luck with everything over the next 6 months.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks, Chris. Take care.
All the best.
Goodbye.
Thank you.